my topic is matter waves, de Broglie hypothesis, a striking idea by Professor de Broglie. First of all, I would like to mention about nature. The two fundamental forms of nature are matter and energy. We already know that dual nature of energy. Energy or radiation, it will be in the form of wave, but sometimes it acts as a particle. According to Max Planck, we know that the interaction between matter and energy takes place in a discontinuous fashion rather than a continuous manner. The absorption or emission of energy by matter will be in discrete amounts or in the form of quanta or in the form of photons. Photon is a synthesis of dual nature of radiation. So, whenever we are imposing dual nature to wave, according to de Broglie, why not we impose same dual nature in the case of a particle? So, to explain interference, diffraction, polarization, etc., generally we adopt wave nature of radiation. To explain some modern concepts like photoelectric effect, Compton effect, etc., etc., we impose corpuscular nature or particle nature to the radiation or energy. This is about the first part of the nature. Now I would like to move to the second part of the nature, that is nothing but matter or particle. So matter or particle will have its own properties like energy, mass, momentum, etc., etc. But de Broglie proposed that sometimes the particle also acts as wave, and he proposed that two fundamental forms of matter and energy in which nature manifests herself must be mutually symmetric. This is the basis for de Broglie's matter waves. Whenever energy possesses dual nature, at the same time the particle also should have dual nature. This is the basic idea of de Broglie. Whenever a material particle travels or when it is under motion, a wave associates with the material particle. This wave is known as matter wave or de Broglie wave. Here I would like to mention an important point. Particle nature and wave nature, these two aspects will not appear simultaneously in any experiment. In an experiment, if we want to adopt wave nature, then we have to take wave nature. Or if we want to take particle nature, or if we want to adopt particle nature, then we have to adopt particle nature. These two aspects will never appear simultaneously in any experiment. It is an important point that we have to remember. Now, what is the matter wave wavelength according to de Broglie's hypothesis? So, according to de Broglie's hypothesis, if lambda is the wavelength of matter wave, then lambda equals to h by p or h by mv. Here p is momentum or mv is momentum. Here m is mass of the material particle and v is velocity of the material particle. How to get this formula? Using two basic steps we can obtain this formula. So you know that according to Einstein's mass energy equivalence, E equals to mc square. E equals to, we know that the energy of a photon, that is light corpuscle, is h nu. Here h is Planck's constant and nu is frequency of radiation. Now E equals to h nu. Comparing these two equations, mc square equals to h nu or mc square equals to h nu equals to c by lambda, where c is velocity of light and lambda is wavelength. So from this formula we can say, or we can obtain lambda equals to h by mc. So in the case of a photon, m is its mass and c is velocity of light and h is Planck's constant. Suppose if we extend this idea to a material particle, then instead of c we can write v. V is velocity of material particle, and we extend the formula in the case of a material particle. Then the wavelength of the matter wave, which is associating a mechanical particle under motion, is given by lambda equals to h by mv or h by p. So this is the formula for wavelength of matter wave. Now let us see different forms to solve some problems by the students. We can see different forms of wavelength of matter wave. We know that lambda equals to h by p. The energy of a particle is p square by 2m, where p is momentum and m is mass of the material particle. So from this, p square equals to 2me. In other words, p equals to root over 2me. So lambda equals to h by root over 2me. This is another form. Here m is mass of the material particle and E is kinetic energy of the moving material particle. H is Planck's constant. Using this you can find out the wavelength associated with the material particle. It may be proton, electron or some neutron, whatever it may be. Using this formula easily you can find out lambda. Now I would like to extend my idea in the case of an electron. Suppose if the charged particle is electron, then I can modify the formula like this. Say E equals to QV in the case of an electron. What is Q? Q is charge on the electron, V is potential in which the electron is traveling. So if E is replaced by QV, then what happens to lambda? Lambda equals to h by root over 2mqv. Now what is h? Planck's constant, 6.6 into 10 power minus 34 joule second. M, mass of the electron, rest mass of the electron, 9.11 into 10 power minus 31 kg. What is Q? Q is charge on the electron, 1.6 into 10 power minus 19 coulomb. And V, it is the potential drop in which our electron is traveling. Suppose if you substitute this numerical data and express in centimeters, then we will get a formula lambda equals to 12.26 by root V. This is expressed in angstroms, that you should remember, and this is strictly applicable for electron. I can say it is a competitive question. If students remember this formula, this is a very, very important formula, not only at degree level but also at intermediate level. Suppose if an electron is dropped in a potential drop of 100 volt, then what happens to root V? The root V becomes 10. So 12.26 by 10, it comes out to be 1.226 angstroms. So that will be the wavelength of matter wave which is associating the electron. So once again I am telling you, it is strictly applicable for electron only. Suppose if you are given proton or neutron, again you have to substitute the data in the formula, then only you will get wavelength, and this is strictly applicable for electron. Now I would like to give you another formula regarding this one. Suppose if a particle, material particle, is at thermal equilibrium at a temperature T, then E equals to 3 by 2 kT. Here K is Boltzmann's constant and T is temperature at which the material particle is under thermal equilibrium. So instead of E, if you substitute 3 by 2 kT, then also you will get another formula. Using this formula also, in some cases, as per the demand of the problem, you can find out wavelength which is associating with the material particle. Now, I would like to discuss some properties of these matter waves. First of all, I would like to mention in what way our matter waves are different from electromagnetic waves. Matter waves are charge independent. It depends upon velocity of the material particle only, that we have to remember. Whereas electromagnetic waves will be generated because of charged particles when they are under acceleration. An accelerated charged particle will produce electromagnetic waves. So they are charge dependent, but matter waves are charge independent. That we have to remember. So by using the formula, easily you can understand some properties of matter waves. What is the fundamental formula here? The lambda equals to h by mv. So from this formula we can understand when lighter is the particle, then higher will be the wavelength of matter wave which is associating the moving particle. So that is the first property. So we know that the wavelength of matter wave is more connected with velocity. Suppose if the velocity of the material particle is 0, if v equals to 0, then lambda becomes indeterminate. Suppose if v equals to infinity, then lambda becomes 0. So these are two important properties of matter waves. So as I said, the matter wave is charge independent and only it depends upon velocity, and both particle nature and wave nature will not appear simultaneously in any experiment. This is another important property that we have to observe in the case of matter waves also. Next, I would like to mention an important unexpected result in the case of matter waves. We know that the matter wave velocity W equals to nu lambda. Here nu is frequency. How to find out this frequency? We know the formula. E equals to mc square, E equals to h nu. By comparing these two equations, h nu equals to mc square. In other words, nu equals to mc square by h. Also we know that lambda, according to de Broglie's formula, lambda equals to h by mv. Now let us substitute these two parameters nu comma lambda in the equation. Then W equals to mc square by h into h by mv. So from this equation we will get the matter wave velocity W equals to c square by v. Here v is velocity of the material particle, W is velocity of matter wave. From this, c is velocity of light. From this equation, easily you can understand that W is greater than c. So this is an unexpected result. No material particle never attains a velocity which is greater than light velocity. But here we got an unexpected result. To overcome this result, a group velocity was introduced by the scientists. Wave velocity is different from group velocity. A group consists of number of waves which are slightly differing velocities and slightly differing frequencies, and on the average the group will have its velocity, that is known as group velocity. We can prove that group velocity Vg equals to particle velocity v particle. It is not equal to phase velocity. Phase velocity means it is an average velocity of a wave in the group. But a single wave velocity or phase velocity is not equal to particle velocity, but particle velocity is equal to group velocity. So we arrived at a new assumption, that is nothing but a group will follow, or a group of waves or a wave packet will associate a particle which is under motion. Without any experimental result, actually de Broglie proposed his hypothesis. As far as my knowledge is concerned, the de Broglie hypothesis was proposed with three considerations. The first consideration is nature loves symmetry. Two fundamental forms in the nature, that is energy and matter, must be symmetrical. It means that if energy or radiation exhibits dual nature, at the same time the matter or particle should also exhibit dual nature. This is the first consideration. Now the second consideration is there is a close parallelism between optics and mechanics. In mechanics, there is a principle known as Mapperschen principle of least action. A particle always chooses the path where the action is minimum. This is the behavior of a particle. At the same time, if we go for optics, there is a principle known as Fermat's principle of least time. According to this principle, a light ray always chooses the path where the time of transit is minimum. Almost there is a close parallelism. There is an analogy between these two formulae. One belongs to particle and the other one belongs to radiation. This is the second consideration. And the third consideration is integer's law. In the case of Bohr's theory, we know that the angular momentum of an electron is governed by an integer law. What is that integer law? mvr equals to nh by 2 pi. If n equals to 1, h by 2 pi is the angular momentum in the first orbit. Here the orbit is a non-radiating orbit or stationary orbit. In that way, a particle, electron, is governed by an integer law. And in the case of transverse waves also we can see this type of formula. In the case of a stretched string, the modes of vibration nu n is governed by an integer law nv by 2l. Here also n takes values 1, 2, 3, 4, etc., etc. So from these two formulae we can understand there is a close parallelism between particle nature and wave nature. So with these considerations, without any experimental fact, de Broglie made a bold attempt and he wrote his thesis. Now afterwards, Davison and Germer, two American physicists, found an experimental proof for de Broglie's hypothesis or de Broglie's matter waves. Now let us go through this experiment. This experiment is an accidental one. It is not intentional. So accidentally in the laboratory, while they were doing an experiment on crystallography, unexpectedly they got this result. Now let us see the experimental setup by Davison and Germer. It essentially consists of an electron gun G. A filament is arranged inside the electron gun and it will be heated by means of a battery to dull red. Due to thermionic emission process, this filament will emit electrons. Now these electrons will be accelerated by an accelerating voltage. Slits are used to get fine pencil of P. Now they used a nickel crystal which is known as target and which is fixed to a holder, and the target is capable of rotating in any direction about its own axis. Now here there is a graduated scale S which ranges from 29 degrees to 90 degrees. A Faraday cylinder or collector will slide over this semicircular scale as shown in the diagram. What is the advantage of this Faraday cylinder? A Faraday cylinder or collector consists of two walls. They are perfectly insulated and evacuated, and a retarding potential will be applied to this collector so that only primary electrons or powerful electrons can reach the collector, and secondary electrons, those are belonging to nickel crystal, cannot reach the collector. So only to get primary ionization or primary electrons or primary intensity of current, generally a retarding potential is applied between the two walls of the collector. So a galvanometer will be connected to Faraday cylinder as shown in the diagram. So the angle between incident path of the electron beam and reflected path of the electron beam is known as colatitude. So if we change the position of the Faraday cylinder, the colatitude also changes. That we have to observe here. So this will be evacuated and placed in a glass chamber, and this is the basic structure of the Davison-Gerber experimental setup. Now let us see the procedure. For different colatitudes for a given accelerating voltage, the intensities are recorded by means of galvanometer and curves are drawn as shown in the diagram. Here we can change the accelerating voltage. So the experiment was begun with 44 volt accelerating voltage and it was extended up to 60 volt. For different accelerating voltages, for different values of colatitude, the corresponding intensities of electron beams are recorded and graphs are drawn as shown in the diagram. Now let us see the graphs which are shown on the board. At 44 volt voltage, accelerating voltage, a bump started. We can observe a bump. At 48 voltage or at 48 volt accelerating voltage, there is a development in the bump that we can observe. And the development of the bump is more prominent at an accelerating voltage of the 54 volt and at a colatitude of 50 degrees. For a colatitude of 50 degrees, for an accelerating voltage of 54 volt, we can observe the development of bump is most prominent. And beyond 54 volt, if you make any attempt to increase the accelerating voltage, the development of bump gradually decreases. And finally, beyond 60 volt, if you make any attempt to increase the accelerating volt at a particular accelerating voltage, it may disappear also. Now my concentration and my focus is on 54 volt accelerating voltage because the development in the bump is most prominent at this position, and here we can say the electrons are diffracting. This is a very important point that we have to mention. Diffraction is the property of a wave. It is not the property of a particle. But these two scientists understood that the electrons are suffering diffraction at an accelerating voltage of 54 volt corresponding to a colatitude of 50 degrees. Now regarding electrons, we know that the lambda equals to root over 150 by V angstroms. In other words, it is 12.26 by root V. So you substitute 54 volt for this lambda. This comes out to be root over 150 by 54 angstroms, and approximately the value will be 1.66 angstroms. This is de Broglie's formula. This is the formula which belongs to matter waves. Now in diffraction, we have a formula given by 2d sin theta equals to n lambda. This is a formula which purely belongs to wave nature of light. In diffraction, 2d sin theta equals to n lambda. So here d is crystal spacing, it is 0.91 angstroms, and theta is the co-attitude, or I can say this is angle of diffraction of electron beam, it is 50 degrees. By substituting this result in this data in the equation 2d sin theta equals to n lambda, we will get lambda approximately 1.67 angstroms, and this is an excellent matching with the value we got with lambda equals to root over 150 by V angstroms, that is 1.66 angstroms. So in this way, Davison and Germer successfully gave an experimental verification for de Broglie's hypothesis. Here the accelerating voltages are very low. If we observe, the accelerating voltages are very low in this experiment. Thomson, another physicist, who performed an experiment to find out this electron diffraction with high accelerating voltages, roughly they will start with 10,000 volts, 10,000 volts to 30,000 volts. He also proved that electrons are diffracting and gave an excellent experimental result and a great support to de Broglie's hypothesis. Here I would like to conclude my lecture with a small statement. J.J. Thomson studied the properties of electron widely. He found E by m of an electron, with which we know that we can estimate the mass of the electron. So he widely studied the properties of electron, and he took electron as a particle. That is the point there. Whereas his son G.P. Thomson, he proved that electron will suffer some diffraction and electron acts as a wave. So if we understand the point here, the father studied the particle nature of electron, whereas son studied the wave nature of electron, and both father and son won Nobel Prizes. This is my statement. Thank you.